Okay, so now I changed my mind. The spread of HIV has nothing to do with vaginal shape in African Americans or people in Sub-Saharan Africa, or with anal caliber in men who have sex with men. Just kidding. Of course, it has everything to do with it. I changed my mind in that now I am even about 98% sure that my explanation is also valid for Sub-Saharan Africa. In the summary video, I think I stated that I am about 75% sure that I have found the main cause for Sub-Saharan Africa and blacks, but now I am even about 95 or 98% sure that I am also right for the spread in blacks around the world. Because, well, how do I think? Now, recently there was this Nietzsche doodle from Google, and I don't know if that was internationally the case, but it certainly was the case in Europe here. And in my youth, when I was naive and not yet trained as an analytic philosopher, as a strict logical thinker, I did read quite a bit of Nietzsche, and when he was already quite mad, quite damaged by his maybe syphilis, I'm not sure if it was that, he wrote texts with titles such as Why I Am So Wise, Why I Am a Destiny, Why I Am So Clever. So in a way this will now be something along those lines. Actually, I hope not. So how do I think? Again, why is my explanation so plausible? This is almost like the Nietzsche title. Why is my explanation so plausible? Well, first of all, the HIV/AIDS spread has nothing to do with behavior or social variables, because these are really too unspecific for the high-risk groups. They are not at all specific for people in Sub-Saharan Africa, and they are not specific for MSM either. Poverty, lack of health care, lack of circumcision, gender inequality, sex work, sexual violence. You find them in so many places in the world where HIV prevalence is very low. Take India. This is my favorite example. I also made a lot of comments on other HIV videos here, having that content or having that message. Take India. You have poverty, gender inequality, sexual violence, poor health care. You also have the type C HIV, the clade C HIV there. You have a lack of circumcision in Hindus and Buddhists. You have no CCR5 receptor mutation. As far as I know, it's really Caucasians where this is really prevalent. But still, the prevalence of HIV is the total numbers are high in India due to the high to the large population, but the relative prevalence is almost nothing as compared to Sub-Saharan Africa or some black centers in the US. It's far too unspecific. Even in conjunction, as I said, in India, you have almost all the factors that you find in Sub-Saharan Africa. In some populations or some parts of India, poverty is even worse than in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's a hodgepodge of risk factors that is even different across the globe for the same disease or for the same spread. In blacks in North America, they say it's one of the factors for the spread is incarceration. But again, incarceration is not really specific. Yes, it does create a certain risk of male-to-male sexual contact and male-to-male sexual violence, which otherwise would not be so high in these populations. But there are again, it's not really specific. There are comparable risk factors or risk situations in armies, in war, in a mandatory military service, where all men are put together, are caged together for sometimes weeks without a holiday, and it creates a similar risk of male-to-male contacts and violence. And also in MSM you don't have you don't really have the poverty. It's a different hodgepodge of risk factors there. You don't have the poverty so much. You don't have the low education, as they say, for blacks or for Sub-Saharan Africa. You don't really have that. The people who came to San Francisco in the flower power times were rich upper middle class kids mostly, so they are not so poor. There is healthcare. Healthcare is perfect, or well, people or the countries boast that it is perfect. I wouldn't say it is perfect, but people say it is perfect in Europe or in Scandinavia or these places. But still, the MSM were the ones who were hit by the epidemic, even in countries where healthcare is almost perfect. So stop talking about this hodgepodge of risk factors that doesn't really help people. I know that this request of mine to study these things is a bit pretentious or a bit provoking, arrogant. Maybe people still today criticize Semmelweis, the Hungarian doctor who found out about the cause of childbed fever, of pure pearl fever of the mothers. The cause was bacteria from the physician's hands, and people think that his failure during life to convince others was due to his arrogance or to his not being humble towards his colleagues when presenting his ideas. And he was eventually put in a lunatic asylum, actually, because he went to couples, he talked to couples on the street, stopped them, and told them to tell doctors to wash their hands when the mother is in hospital, in labor. But I would have put Semmelweis in a lunatic asylum if he had really humbly said to his colleagues, well, I honor and love you, and you're good doctors, and I'm one of you, and one team, one family, one club, and but I think you're killing the babies by not washing your hands, but it's not a big deal. You're just killing them, or you're killing not the babies, you're killing the mothers by not washing your hands, by the way. But let's go bowling or golfing tomorrow. How about that? Yes, maybe you can wash your hands. Maybe then the mothers won't die. So I would have said, off you go to the loony bin. So the behavioral and social factors are way too implausible as a cause, as a causal factor, or as a mix of factors. Even if you say, well, yes, even in conjunction, it's not really specific, but the epidemic started in Africa. This was the origin of the virus, so this could explain it. Still not a good argument, because the virus does spread in populations and areas where it did not originate, and it does it in rates comparable to the rates in the place where it did originate. That is North America, blacks in North America, and MSM around the world, at least in some centers, and at the beginning or during the first years or the first decades of the epidemic, where they didn't know what caused this disease, this immune deficiency. So social factors, behavioral factors, no. Sexual behavior is not too different in Sub-Saharan Africa. The number of partners is not very different. Concurrency, it's a little higher, but it may also due to reporting bias, because if you have such an enormous, vast, terrible epidemic in your country, which harms you and which kills your relatives and so on, you tend to be more honest about how much you cheat and how many partners you have on the side. But this is just a subjective conjecture. So it must be a biological factor. It's not behavior, It's not socioeconomic conditions. It must be a hard biological factor that leads to this epidemic in both MSM and blacks. Also, a recent study about black MSM is very good for showing that it's not behavior, because there was a population, or there were many populations of black MSM who had less risk behavior, that is, who were less promiscuous, protected themselves more, and took less drugs than a white population of MSM, and they still had higher infection rates. But if these factors, the common factors among MSM, drugs, promiscuity, not protecting oneself, if this were the driving factor, or if these were driving factors, then you would expect that people who use more drugs, protect themselves less, and are more promiscuous have higher rates of HIV. But now it turned out in this white-black comparison that it's actually the other way, or that this was not the case, that those black MSM who protected themselves more were less promiscuous and took less drugs. They had higher infection rates. So it cannot be behavior. It must be biology, globally. And now what biological factor is it? Now I've also offered an argument, a logical argument. Must be careful, because this emphasis on logic makes me sound like some crackpot. It's all logical and all the established truths are worth nothing. I must be careful not to sound too much like a crackpot. But any scientific revolution, any paradigm shift started with someone who had the total, who maybe fulfilled even all criteria of some crackpot. Take H. pylori or pylori, or the view that the sun is in the center of the universe, not the universe, but our solar system, and that the Earth revolves. Now, I recently offered this logical argument that if this biological factor has anything to do with the genital organs, with the anogenital organs, then it cannot be the mucosa, or then it cannot be some rectal versus vaginal mucosal difference. I would even generalize this argument. I only used the argument to show that the vaginal mucosa, or that the rectal mucosa in MSM cannot be responsible. I pitted it against the vaginal mucosa, and I derived an argument that the rectal mucosa cannot be responsible. Why? Because of global epidemiology. The premises were behavioral social factors don't matter that much, and the structure, microbiology of the epithelium of the vagina in Sub-Saharan Africa is not different from the structure and function of the vaginal epithelium in white women, in Caucasian women. Those were the premises, and given these premises and the global epidemiology, you can derive that the mucosa cannot be, or that the intact mucosa cannot be a main factor for the HIV spread. Because given global epidemiology, you would say that the rectal mucosa is more prone to HIV infection than the vaginal mucosa, simply because of epidemiological numbers in the rich countries. But then if you look at Sub-Saharan Africa or at black populations, you would have to say that the risk for rectal transmission is about the same as vaginal transmission. And so the mucosa cannot play that much of a role. Cannot be the factor, and you can actually generalize that. You can do that with with everything that's different between vagina and rectum. Take M cells. The rectum has more M cells for immunology. The vagina works with dendritic cells or some other cells. And then if you say, well, maybe it's the M cells that drive this infection in MSM, you would have the same problem. Because then you would say M cells are more prone to HIV infection than some cells in the vagina because of epidemiology in rich countries. Heterosexuals don't get it that much. It's in almost every country more than in the US it's different because there are so many blacks. But in European countries, about 70% of the infections. Of the new infections or any infections with HIV is due to MSM, about 70% at least. So the M cells of the rectum are more prone to HIV infection than some cells in the vagina. But now looking at black populations, you would have to say, well, no, the M cells in the rectum are just as prone to HIV infection, or even less prone to HIV infection. If you look at Swaziland, for example, than cells in the vagina. So the M cells cannot be responsible. Or what else could you use? Hemorrhoids. Yes, hemorrhoidal tissue not present in the vagina. For any difference, you could say, well, hemorrhoids are responsible. They are more prone to HIV infection than some structure in the vagina, because the vagina doesn't have hemorrhoids. Yes, but then looking at black populations, you would have to say, oh no, it's just the same proneness to HIV infection. So again, this is you can derive a contradiction. It leads to a contradiction. So these differences, anything that's different, any biological factor, intrinsic or confined to anogenital organs, any biological factor that's different between vagina and rectum cannot be responsible for the spread simply because of global epidemiology. And so you can from this generalized argument derive the statement or the fact almost that if the biological factor for the HIV spread has something to do with the anogenital organs, or is confined to something in the anogenital organs, then it must be a factor that is the same in MSM and blacks and heterosexual blacks. It simply must be the same factor if it is something confined to anogenital organs. And now a further approach, or a further strategy or overview of my thinking process. Nietzsche would say, why I am so wise. I recently sent an update to AIDS researchers around the world because they don't talk to me, and there I said it's not intelligence that made me do this, it's love that made me do this. Because I simply cannot stand that people who just came out of oppression, who just came out of apartheid and misery and exploitation, colonial exploitation, slavery, oppression, homophobia, that they are the ones who should be hit so much by that virus. I simply cannot stand it, and this made me do it. It's not intelligence that determined me in doing this. Now, another argument or approach why this is so plausible. Now, we already established that it must be a biological factor that is responsible for the spread of HIV. Because, again, I repeat, Asperger's always repeat a lot. I'm sorry for that. I'm also aware that it makes me appear quite retarded, but it's simply my nature. I repeat, the social and behavioral factors are far too unspecific for the high-risk groups. It's quite implausible, so it must be a biological factor. And there are now, every good clinician or a pathologist knows that there are only 6 diseases in the world, or types of diseases, or mechanisms of pathology, or, for that matter, reasons for health disparities among people. And this is malformation or anatomical variant, inflammation or infection, tumor and neoplasia, trauma or chemical physical injury, metabolism or something that has to do with biochemistry and physiology on a let's say on a microscopic level, or on an atomic level, on something which is biochemical, and circulation problems with blood circulation, with vascular problems. There are only these 6 pathological mechanisms or reasons for health disparities on a biological plane. So I'd rule out circulation. Why should circulation have to do something with HIV spread? The vascular system is not too different in blacks, MSM, and the rest. I'd simply rule that out as implausible. Now, I'd also take the metabolism, biochemistry, or a microscopic physiology part. I discard that because of the sex worker studies, where they found that sex workers who were thought to be immune to HIV caught it after taking a vacation or after stopping sex work, and then when they resumed sex work or sexual activity, they were infected. And I don't think that something on a biochemical level or on an immunological level in the immunological system changes through taking a vacation. Also, older sex workers had some protection against HIV in Sub-Saharan Africa or in Kenya. I think the study was from Kenya. And the young sex workers were infected. The old sex workers, female sex workers, had some protection or a lot of protection. And again, in 10 to 20 years, differences on this immunological, genetic, biochemical level don't develop. They need more time to develop. And also age itself does not protect against infection. There are even many Caucasian women who just maybe lost their husband or had a divorce and are around menopause, are postmenopausal women who are somewhat drier down there and also tighter because they're not used to sexual intercourse anymore, and they do catch HIV when they resume sexual activity. So age per se does not protect. It's so this difference between young sex workers and old sex workers in HIV risk. This almost rules out, or this does rule out the metabolism, immunology, biochemistry factor. Cannot be responsible for the HIV disparities around the world. Tumor, neoplasia, equally implausible. You would see it. If it is a malignant tumor, then it leads to death. You would see that, of course, in the course of AIDS, when HIV has the body in its grip and is or shows as AIDS, then tumors are malignancies are more probable, but tumors themselves are not responsible for the transmission of HIV. You would see that if it's malignant tumors, then people would realize that people are sick. Neoplasia, you would see it. So implausible too. Now this leaves trauma, malformation, anatomical variant, and inflammation infection. Now, inflammation infection would actually be a good candidate. There are many people who think that sexually transmitted infections are responsible for this disproportionate spread of HIV in the high-risk groups, in MSM and in Sub-Saharan Africa. And yes, STIs are more common in MSM and in blacks around the world. So this actually is a good candidate. But I would put that one on the back burner for now, because the reasons for this disproportionate prevalence of STIs, reasons for this are poorly understood. If there is infection, when we know the bugs for all those sexually transmitted infections, it's no mystery there. But we don't know how do they get those bugs? This leaves a puzzle. So this explanation is not really good, because this puzzles. This doesn't lead anywhere. And also this puzzle could be explained with my explanation that comes now. So I put that infection part on the back burner as a cause for the disproportionate HIV spread. And now all we are left with is trauma and malformation, or for that matter, anatomical variant. And this is, I think, exactly what is the cause of the disproportionate spread. And it leads to a higher number of STIs in the high-risk groups for HIV, because trauma makes a transmission of other STIs more likely. Trauma happens because there is an anatomical variant in about a third of MSM and in about a third or 40% of black women. And this also leads to a higher number of STIs. Just an epiphenomenon of the true factors that drive the epidemic.